Hello, beautiful people. I'm going to go over the quiz module 9, which is all rationals, and I'm going to go over the answers so that way we can learn from our mistakes. Again, disclaimer, if you hear a loud bell, I apologize. If there is anyone on the intercom, I apologize. And of course, if I make a mistake, I am human. All you have to do is just let me know so that way I too can learn from my mistakes. All right, let's get started. Simplify each and state the excluded value. So for each question here, you have two questions in each question. So like an A and a B part. So first you need to simplify, then you need to state the excluded values. So by simplify, you want things to cancel out. Okay, you want things to combine, cancel. Notice how on all of these questions, they're all in standard or expanded form. So because of that, we need to factor. Like keyword here is factor, 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 factor. Okay, so let's factor. Because this is a trinomial, I'm going to use the guess and check method. So I know that I'm going to have a p here. And then two numbers that multiply to 14, but when I add them together, they give me 9. I have a positive 7 and a positive 2. I'm going to factor the denominator, same thing. It is a trinomial, so I am putting 2 p's there. And then two numbers that multiply to 10 but add up to 7, that would be 5 and 2. This is where things are going to bring you joy. So example, you see that p plus 2 and you have that p plus 2? We get to cross them out. This is how it works. This says p plus 7 times p plus 2. So you have two bubbles that are being multiplied together. Same thing in the denominator, p plus 5 times p plus 2. Again, two bubbles being multiplied together. So because we have multiplication and we have division, this big old bar here is division. This is divided by. The multiplication and division are opposite operations, so they kind of undo each other. So if we have p plus 2 divided by p plus 2, that just crosses out and gives us a big old 1. So then p plus 7 times 1 is just p plus 7. P plus 5 times 1 is just p plus 5. And you have your answer. Now, you cannot cross out these two p's. Because of this addition, that means these two are grouped together. You have one bubble on top. You have a second bubble on the bottom. You cannot split up the terms in a bubble. Cannot do it. The only way you can split up terms in a bubble is if you can factor something out and turn it into multiplication. There are no common terms here that we can factor out. There is no GCF, anything like that, so we leave it. Now, this is part 1. The second part is excluded values. Now, excluded values are values that your variable cannot be because it would make the denominator 0. Now, the easiest way that I can think of to do this is anytime you see a variable in the denominator after you have factored, but before you have canceled anything out, either circle them or draw an arrow. I usually draw an arrow. This way, you will identify all of the excluded values. We do not care for what the values are in the numerator because the numerator can be 0. The denominator cannot be 0 because then the world explodes. Okay, so it can't happen. Denominator 0 is a bad thing. So what does p have to be in order to make this bubble 0? So p has to be -5 because if I plug in -5 here, -5 plus 5 is 0. We can't have this bubble be 0. P cannot be -2 because if I plug in -2 into this bubble becomes 0. So P cannot be -2 and -5. both -2 and -5 are excluded values. Can't be. Okay. There is another way to find excluded values. So if you're interested, definitely let me know. But I 100% prefer this method because of a property we have that if one of these bubbles is 0, we're just multiplying by 0, therefore all of the denominator will be 0. And if the other bubble is 0, anything times 0 again is 0. So I definitely prefer this method over the other one, but if you'd like to know more, definitely let me know. Okay, let's do number 2. Now number 2 gave a lot of people some headache, a lot. Step number 1 for number 2 is GCF. Factor out your GCF. What do you have in common? All terms here you can pull out a 2, leaving you with 7m squared plus 32m minus 60. This is all divided by, we're going to factor out a 3 out of all of these terms. 2m squared plus 9m minus 18. Now do not let these big numbers scare you. Do not let these coefficients of 1 scare you. Use the diamond method. Now the diamond method says we're going to multiply these two. So 7 times 6 is 42. They have -42. Bring down the 0 or add on the 0. Then we want to add 232. Now the denominator, same thing. 18 times 2 is, what is 18 times 2? 36. I knew that. 18 times 2 is 36. We're going to add that to 9. So we want to basically guess and check what are two numbers that I add together that give me -420, but when I add them together, give me 32. Now don't let this scare you. I know -420 is a very big number. Not to worry. Okay, start listing the factors of 420 and seeing if any of them add up to 32. And what you will find is that 42 and -10 multiply together to give you -420, but when you add them together, give you +32. Now, I kind of wrote these towards the bottom of this section because now you want to write the leading term here, the 7, on top. And you want to simplify the fractions. You want to keep it as fractions, but you want to simplify. For example, 1/6. But you want to keep it as a fraction. This doesn't simplify, so we're going to keep it the way it is. Now, the numerator of these fractions here is the coefficient of your x when you are factoring. So coefficient of 1. The denominator is the constant. So again, the numerator is your coefficient. Yeah, your coefficient, and then the denominator is your constant. And I just realized that that should be a negative, not a positive. So let's quickly change that. So that should be a minus. That's why I'm not moving where the negative is, because it tells me if I move up the negative to the -7, it wouldn't give me what I need. Okay, so that is my numerator. My denominator, same thing. Two numbers that I multiply together, they give me -36, but when I add it, give me 9. So that will be 12 and -3. Write your leading coefficient here. Simplify. So this does not simplify. Keep your negative where it was. And this simplifies to 1/6. So again, the numerator tells you the coefficient of your variable, which is just 1, so x. The denominator tells you the constant, again, 2x minus 3. Okay, perfect. Now, be careful. These factors are only what was in your bubble. So what do you have outside the bubble? Well, you have a 2 and a 3 outside the bubble. So you must bring them along with you. So you still have a 2 and you still have a 3. And again, wonderful things happen because we have our multiplication and division. So these two cancel out. So what we have left over is 2 times 7x minus 10 and 3 times 2x minus 3. Now, this is only part 1 of the question. We need to state our excluded values. So once again, here's our factored form before we cancel anything out. I'm going to identify my variables. And you guys, I just realized that our variable was an m, and then midway I switched to an x. Don't worry about that. As long as you have a variable, I don't care. Variable just represents a number. Just once you make that switch, be consistent with it. So I'm not, once I made the switch from m to x, I'm not going back to m. I'm just going to keep it as x. Okay, here's my 2. So this one is a -6. Now this one's a little bit more tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this equal to 0 to find out what this bubble has to be, what this variable has to be in order for this bubble to be 0. So I'm going back to like algebra 1, IM1. This is 3 divided by 2. Oh, I'm running out of space. So then therefore x cannot be -6 and it cannot be 3/2. If x is either of those, we get a 0 as our denominator and our world explodes. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. Okay. Factoring. Same thing. We're going to use our guess and check method for factoring. So all of these, we're just multiplying. What's really great about multiplication is that you just multiply fractions across. You don't need a common denominator, basically don't need much. You just factor and multiply. And fingers crossed something will cancel out. Okay, so we have two numbers multiplied to 48, but add up to 14. I get x plus 6, x plus 8. 6 times 8 is 48. Okay, just making sure. And then x minus 3 and x plus 5. That's 5, that's 15. Okay, just double checking my work here. X plus 6, x minus 3, and x minus 10, x plus 5. Now, if you wanted to write the factors somewhere off to the side, you may. I'm just trying to save some space over here. Okay. Dividing. I have x plus 6 times. I have divided by. This bar right here is divided by. So I get to cancel these two out. Again, this is all times, so we're multiplying across. So I have x minus 3 and x minus 3. I have an x plus 5, x plus 5. So the only thing that's left over here is an x plus 8 and an x minus 10. But wait, there's more. This is only part 1 of the question. You still have to identify all of your excluded values. Make sure you're going back to the original denominators and identifying all of the x values that it cannot be. So here's one, here's another one, here's a third one, here's a fourth one. So even though the answer looks very, very simple, it does have 4 excluded values. So x cannot be -6, x cannot be 3, x cannot be 10, and x cannot be -5. Okay. All right, let's move on. Now this one I ran out of room because I was working on the other one, so I will rewrite it. But something immediately that's jumping out at me is this negative here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this without a negative. I'm going to factor out a negative. So here's n squared minus 14n plus 40. Okay, when you're factoring out a negative, what you're really factoring out is a -1. Some of you might think this is overkill, and that's okay. I just want to point out you're not just getting rid of that negative, you're pulling it out. It's still there, it still exists. Okay, let's factor guess and check method. So I have on top, oh, I just realized we have division. We have division. So here's the thing, you guys. When you have division, you're doing the Kfc method. I don't know if any of your teachers told you about the Kfc. We're going to keep this one here. We're going to flip the second one. and we're going to change the sign to multiplication. Again, keep the first fraction, flip the second fraction, change the sign to multiplication. So when I'm rewriting my expression in factored form, I will do the KFC. I will apply the KFC. So I'm going to keep this on the top, and this factors out to n minus 10, n minus 1. I'm going to factor out, divided by, this is what? This is n minus 4, n minus 10. So we're flipping and I'm changing the sign. So this is n minus 8 and n minus 4. And this is n minus 1, n minus 8. Ooh, and it turns out I didn't even change it. Did I change it? I did change it. Did I change it? Yes, I did change it. I did change it. Bear with me. Let's verify this. So this should be the, if this is on top, this should be coming from the bottom. So n minus 8, n minus 4. 8 times 4 is 32. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, that works. 8 and 1, that's 8. 8, that should be negative 9. Okay, perfect. All right. Then what? Well, then we just multiply. It's the same thing, right? So let's see, things are going to start to cancel out, hopefully. N minus 10, n minus 10, n minus 1, n minus 1, n minus 4, n minus 4, n minus 8, n minus 8. Okay. All right. Are we ready? There's nothing left, so the answer is 0. That is wrong. The answer is not 0 because we do have something left over. Do you see this? See this negative 1? Anytime you cancel something out, it becomes a 1. So negative, to n minus 10, n minus 10, that's 1. N minus 1, n minus 1, that's 1. That's 1, and this is 1. And remember, we're multiplying. So we have 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. Negative 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 is negative 1. And this simplifies to just negative 1. So your solution or answer to number 4 is negative 1. Okay. But wait, there's more. We got to identify your zeros. Okay, got to identify your zeros. Again, before you cancel anything out, I like drawing the arrows because it just shows me all of the zeros that we're going to have excluded. All the variables. Let me try again. All of the values that we're going to have excluded when we are plugging in for our variable. So n cannot be 4, 10, 1, and 8. Okay. All right, so here is the first part. I'm going to do this in multiple videos. So this is the first part. Simplify, state the excluded values. I'm going to zoom out. That way you can have everything at the same time. Hopefully you can see that. Probably not with the light markers. But if you notice any mistakes, please let me know. If you have any questions, please let me know. I am here for you. I would like for every single person to succeed when they're solving and when they're simplifying rational expressions.